The living room felt like a warm hug that night. Soft fairy lights glowing, the smell of buttered popcorn in the air, and the sound of my friends' laughter spilling into every corner. I was curled up on the rug, my knee brushing against Ethan's, feeling that cozy comfort of being with people who've known you for years. Game night had always been our thing, a mix of harmless fun and just enough mischief to keep things interesting. Everyone pretended it was just for laughs, but we all knew the best part was when someone's answer sparked a week of whispered group chats. The rules were simple: answer the question or take the shot. Most of us would rather face the burn than give away something truly personal. Sophie, one of my closest friends from college, leaned forward with this little smirk I knew all too well. "What's your biggest secret?" she asked Ethan, her tone playful but sharp enough to catch my attention. I smiled, expecting something silly. Maybe about the time he locked himself out in boxers, or the stash of candy he hides in the garage. But Ethan froze, not for a second, long enough for everyone to notice. The laughter died down, replaced by an awkward silence that clung to the room. He wouldn't look at Sophie. He wouldn't look at me. Then, without a word, he grabbed his drink and downed it in one go. The room moved on like nothing happened, but I couldn't. I caught Sophie's eyes lingering on him a little too long, and his eyes avoiding hers completely. And right then, something deep in my gut whispered, this wasn't nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overanalyzing. It was just a game, right? But the way Ethan's hand gripped his glass afterward, tight, like he needed something to anchor him, stuck in my mind. And Sophie, she didn't even look away. Her lips curled into this faint, knowing smile, the kind you give when you've just watched someone squirm for all the right reasons. As the questions moved around the circle, I laughed where I was supposed to, took a sip of wine when I didn't want to answer, and even teased a few friends. But my mind kept looping back to that moment, like a song stuck on repeat. It wasn't the pause that got me. It was the look between them. Or maybe it was the look they both tried so hard not to have. By the time the game wrapped up, people were gathering their coats, tossing empty bottles into the recycling, and hugging goodbye. I smiled, played the good host, and thanked everyone for coming. But inside, something had shifted. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, an unease I couldn't name yet. It wasn't just that Ethan wouldn't answer. It was that Sophie asked the question like she already knew the answer. After everyone left, the house felt too quiet, like the laughter had been sucked out along with the last gust of cold night air. I stacked the glasses in the sink, letting the warm water run over my hands, trying to rinse away the unease that clung to me. Ethan was in the living room, half watching some late-night show, pretending nothing about tonight had been strange. I thought about asking him right then, but something told me not to. Not yet. Instead, I studied him from the doorway. The way he sat a little too stiff, the way his eyes didn't wander toward me, like he knew I might ask the one question he didn't want to answer. I'd been married to him long enough to recognize the signs. He was hiding something. I just didn't know what. And Sophie. Why did it have to be Sophie who put that crack in the night? As I went to bed, I lay there listening to the faint hum of the TV in the other room, my mind replaying that one moment over and over. The smirk. The pause. The shot. It was nothing, I told myself, just a silly game with friends. But even as I tried to sleep, I knew I was lying. Something had started tonight, and I wasn't sure where it was going to lead. But I had a feeling it wasn't anywhere good. The next morning, over coffee, I decided to ask him, casually, like it had barely crossed my mind. So, what was with that question last night? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd just told him the world's dumbest joke. It's just a game, Maya. Don't overthink it. His voice was light, but his eyes didn't match the tone. They were guarded, like he was mentally checking the locks on some door I wasn't supposed to open. I let it drop in that moment, but my mind didn't. Instead, it kept circling back to Sophie's smirk, her tone, the way she seemed almost entertained. Over the next few days, Sophie started texting me more than usual. Little things like asking if Ethan would be at a certain event or what time he got off work. It was framed as casual chatter, but something about it made my skin prickle. At the same time, Ethan suddenly developed a love for guys' nights. Poker, pool, catching up over beers, always on the nights Sophie was mysteriously busy and couldn't hang out with me. I tried telling myself it was all coincidence, but deep down, the pieces were starting to rearrange themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. That sinking feeling in my stomach? It wasn't going away. It was growing roots. I started paying closer attention, not in an obvious way, at least I hoped not, but enough to catch patterns. Ethan's phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, was now always face down. He'd step out to take calls, even if it was just for work stuff, and his tone would shift the second he crossed back into the room. Sophie, meanwhile, had mastered the art of slipping his name into our conversations like it was nothing. One night, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Hey, is Ethan still planning that fishing trip?" I frowned, not because of the question itself, but because I hadn't even heard about any fishing trip. When I asked Ethan about it later, he brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh yeah, just something I mentioned in passing. Not sure if it's happening." His words were easy. Too easy. By then my gut was screaming at me. I'd always trusted my instincts. They'd gotten me through more than a few messy situations in life. And right now, they were telling me that something was way off. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that accusations without evidence are just whispers in the wind. I needed something solid. I found myself replaying old memories with Sophie, wondering if there had always been signs I'd missed. Girls' nights where she'd ask how things were really going between Ethan and me. Jokes about how handsome he was, always brushed off as harmless fun. Back then, I'd laughed with her. Now, those same moments felt like little seeds she'd been planting, waiting for the right time to let them grow. Ethan wasn't making it easier. He'd get home later than usual, his excuses wrapped in casual shrugs, traffic, overtime, errands. I'd watch him take off his shoes, move around the house, talk about nothing in particular. But every word felt like it had been carefully chosen, designed to keep me from looking too closely. I was already looking. I just wasn't letting him know it. Lying in bed at night, I'd stare at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside me, steady breaths filling the silence. I'd wonder when exactly things had shifted, and why Sophie's face kept appearing every time I tried to ignore the truth. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was the beginning of something I knew I couldn't stop. And soon, I was going to find out if my gut was right. The chance came on a Sunday morning. Ethan was in the shower, steam fogging up the mirror, his phone left on the nightstand like it had nothing to hide. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was only going to take a quick look, just to quiet the storm in my head. But the moment I unlocked it, I knew I wasn't ready for what I'd find. There they were. Messages from Sophie, stretching back months. Not just friendly banter, but flirty lines. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Little heart emojis tucked between casual words. My fingers scrolled faster, my stomach twisting tighter with each exchange. Photos, hotel addresses, times and dates that lined up perfectly with the work trips and errands Ethan had told me about. It felt like my chest caved in. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was losing my friend, someone I'd let into the most personal corners of my life. My knees gave a little, and I had to sit on the edge of the bed, phone trembling in my hands. But somewhere inside the heartbreak, a colder, sharper feeling began to form. I wasn't going to cry to them about this. I was going to make them wish they'd never played me. I started taking screenshots, every message, every photo, every detail that could cut through any excuse they might try to spin. I saved them to a hidden folder, my hands steady now, my breathing even. It was strange how quickly the shock began to cool into focus. I wasn't going to be the woman who screamed and begged for answers. I was going to be the one who walked away with all the cards. The more I read, the more the puzzle fit together. Their little rendezvous weren't accidents. They'd been carefully planned, each one hidden in plain sight. Birthdays, anniversaries, random days when Sophie had other plans with me. The betrayal was woven into the fabric of my everyday life, and I hadn't even seen it until now. That burned more than anything. By the time Ethan got out of the shower, I had already put his phone back exactly where it was. He walked past me with a smile, kissed the top of my head like everything was normal. And I smiled back. I smiled because he didn't know that, from this moment on, the rules had changed. Over the next few days, I built my case like a detective in a crime drama. I printed out the screenshots, booking receipts, and even the hotel confirmation emails Sophie had sent him. I slid them into a neat folder, chronological, undeniable. Each page was another nail in the coffin they didn't even know they were building for themselves. There were moments I wanted to confront them right away, to watch the color drain from their faces in real time. But the thought of doing it separately felt incomplete. No, they deserved to see each other's shame side by side. They'd been partners in this betrayal. They could be partners in the fallout. So I waited. I smiled at Sophie when we texted, played the loving wife for Ethan at dinner, and let them think they were still in control. Inside, I was counting down the days. When the moment came, it wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be the kind of ending they'd never forget. A few weeks later, I sent out a group text. Game night at our place, same crew as last time. Everyone responded with thumbs ups and smiley faces, Sophie included. I could almost hear her voice in the chirpy, "Can't wait," she sent back. Ethan didn't suspect a thing. He even offered to pick up drinks on his way home from work. I just told him to get whatever he wanted. After all, tonight was going to be memorable. The living room looked almost identical to the last game night. Warm lights, bowls of snacks, music humming low in the background. I wanted it to feel familiar, like we were all slipping into the same easy rhythm. Sophie arrived in a breezy top and her usual confident smile, planting a hug on me like nothing in the world could touch our friendship. I hugged her back, my grip steady, my mind elsewhere. As the game began, laughter flowed, and the drinks loosened tongues. I waited patiently, sipping my wine, letting the conversation roll over me. And then, the turn came around to Ethan. My heart didn't race this time. Instead, I leaned forward with the kind of smile that said I'd been saving this moment. Same question as last time, babe. What's your biggest secret? The room seemed to shrink. Ethan's smile faltered, and I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch as he glanced at the bottle in front of him. Sophie froze mid-sip, setting her glass down a little too carefully, like she was suddenly aware of how shaky her hand had become. A few friends chuckled, expecting some playful banter, but the energy in the room shifted, just like it had weeks ago. Ethan tried to laugh it off. Really? We're doing this again? His voice was lighter than his eyes. He reached for his drink, but I leaned forward, stopping him with nothing but my gaze. Don't worry, I said, my voice steady. I'll answer for you. The words felt like the click of a lock opening. He didn't know yet that the door it unlocked was about to slam shut behind him. I stood, crossed the short distance to the coffee table, and placed the folder right in the center. No theatrics, no shouting, just quiet precision. I flipped it open, letting the pages fan out. The texts, the photos, the hotel bookings. The laughter died instantly. Chairs creaked as people leaned in, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Sophie's face drained of color. Ethan didn't move. I didn't rush. I let every set of eyes in that room take in the details, the pet names, the meeting times, the cheap hotel addresses that now felt like they were written in neon. Someone let out a low whistle. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." But I stayed silent, watching Ethan and Sophie squirm in the thick, suffocating air they'd created. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost conversational. "Turns out my biggest secret," I said, glancing at Ethan, "was thinking I had a loyal husband." I turned my eyes to Sophie, who wouldn't meet them, and a true friend. I didn't wait for excuses. I didn't want them. There was nothing they could say that would make this hurt any less, or make me feel any smaller. I gathered the folder, slipped it under my arm, and headed for the door. No dramatic exit, no slamming. It was quieter than that. I left them in the warm glow of the living room, surrounded by friends who'd just learned exactly who they really were. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The days after game night were a blur, but not the kind that comes with regret. It was a clean blur, like finally wiping a smudge off glass you didn't even realize was clouding your view. I filed for divorce that same week. No hesitation, no second guessing. Ethan tried calling, then texting, then sending long, apologetic emails. I didn't answer any of them. Some doors don't need to be slammed, they just need to be locked for good. Sophie didn't reach out directly. Instead, I heard through mutual friends that she was going through a lot. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't care. What mattered was that my phone was quieter, my life was calmer, and the pit in my stomach had vanished. The woman who used to fill my living room with fake smiles wasn't in my life anymore, and neither was the man who let her. Our shared friends didn't have to choose sides, but they did. Almost all of them stopped inviting Ethan and Sophie anywhere. I didn't ask for that loyalty, but I won't lie. It felt good. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own circle. I was the one holding the truth, and that truth had set me free. Weeks turned into months, and life began to feel lighter. I found myself saying yes to invitations I would have once turned down. Wine tastings, weekend markets, even a pottery class where I made the most lopsided mug in history. These weren't just distractions. They were pieces of a life that felt entirely mine again. Every time I caught myself laughing without that heavy weight in my chest, I realized I'd been holding my breath for years. One night, sitting at a small bistro with a couple of women I'd met through a friend of a friend, I felt something unexpected. Ease. We talked about books, travel, and ridiculous dating stories. No one in that conversation was silently measuring my marriage or keeping a secret from me. It was honest, unfiltered connection, something I didn't realize I'd been starving for until I had it. Meanwhile, I'd occasionally hear snippets about Ethan and Sophie, mostly that they kept to themselves now, their smiles tighter, their circle smaller. I never asked for more details. The truth was, their lives didn't interest me anymore. I wasn't looking back. My world had shifted, and theirs was no longer a part of it. One evening, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Nothing fancy, just good food, music, and people whose company didn't come with an edge of doubt. We lingered over dessert, laughing until our sides hurt, glasses of wine catching the warm light. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I wasn't just moving on. I'd already moved past them. This wasn't the life I was left with. It was the life I'd chosen. As the night wound down, I stepped onto the balcony with my glass, looking out at the city lights. I thought about how one simple question, "What's your biggest secret?" had cracked open everything I thought I knew. And how my answer, delivered in the right moment, had ended more than just a conversation. It had ended a lie. I went back inside, joining the laughter, the warmth, the sense of belonging. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at home in my own skin. One question ended their little secret. My answer ended them.
Don't worry, nobody will remember your contributions anyway. The words hung in the air of Logan's sleek office as I stared at the severance agreement I'd just signed. 5 years of 70-hour weeks reduced to a digital signature and a dismissive comment. I maintained a neutral expression even as I felt my chest tightening. I appreciate the opportunity, I said, rising from the chair. Professional to the end. That's me, Dana Whitaker, Senior Systems Engineer, or former Senior Systems Engineer, as of 3 minutes ago. Logan Merritt, our charismatic CEO, didn't even look up from his laptop. His perfectly styled hair caught the San Diego sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been installed after our Series A funding came through. $10 million to scale the company I'd helped build from the ground up. I walked through the open office space, past rows of engineers who had no idea I wouldn't be returning tomorrow. Some of them were working with my code right now. Code I'd written during countless all-nighters, code that formed the backbone of our entire product. The custom system architecture I designed when we were still working out of that dingy warehouse space downtown, when we couldn't afford air conditioning, and I'd keep coding even as sweat dripped down my back. Heading out early? Called Thomas from his desk, one of the newer hires who had no idea what was happening. Something like that, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I packed my personal items quickly. There weren't many. A small plant, a framed photo of my sister's family, and a coffee mug. 5 years, and I could fit my personal effects into a single canvas tote. I'd given everything else to this company. As I waited for the elevator, I felt a chill creep up my spine. Logan's comment about nobody remembering my contributions wasn't just mean, it was wrong. Every line of that system architecture had my fingerprints on it. The documentation was in my unique structure, designed for my own understanding with shorthand notes that only made sense to me. I had purposely never created the comprehensive guide that had been on my to-do list for 3 years, always postponed for more urgent tasks. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed, I caught one last glimpse of the office that had been my second home. A thought occurred to me then. They really had no idea what they'd just done. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was suddenly very, very aware of my value, and of the precise location of every original architecture draft, version log, and IP-related correspondence that had my name on it. I grew up in the shadow of my father's failure. He was a brilliant engineer who designed a revolutionary battery system back in the 90s. When his company went public, they pushed him out and scrubbed his name from every press release. I vowed I'd never let that happen to me. Yet here I was, 29 years old, walking away from Quantum Shift with nothing but a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement that I had carefully reviewed before signing. The NDA covered company secrets, but it didn't cover my personal documentation process or the files I deliberately sent to my personal attorney before I'd even walked into Logan's office. I'd sensed this coming 3 weeks ago. The whispers, the closed-door meetings, the way Logan had started introducing Troy, the new engineering consultant, to our investors. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. On the drive home, I called my attorney, Valerie Knowles. "I've been dismissed," I said simply. "They're bringing in someone with more experience." "I see," Valerie replied, her voice steady. "And the severance package?" 6 months salary, standard NDA. Nothing about intellectual property beyond what was in my employment contract. "Smart girl," Valerie said, and I could hear her smile. "The files you sent over look solid. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss options." The next day, I didn't feel the customary urge to check my work email or Slack messages. Instead, I slept until 9 a.m. for the first time in years, made myself a proper breakfast, and drove to Valerie's office with a strange sense of lightness. Valerie had laid out my files across her conference table. Architecture diagrams, version control logs, emails that clearly showed my contributions, and, most importantly, proof that I had created the custom authentication system that made Quantum Shift's product unique in the marketplace. "You've been meticulous," Valerie said. "Most people don't document like this." My father taught me to keep receipts, I replied. So what do you want to do with all this? She asked, gesturing to the evidence of my 5 years of work. I sat down, considering my options. I wasn't vindictive by nature. I hadn't been raised to seek revenge, but I had been raised to value my own worth. Nothing yet, I decided, but I want to be ready. Valerie nodded, understanding perfectly. They'll come looking for you. Companies like this always do, once they realize what they've lost. And when they do, we'll be prepared. I left Valerie's office feeling strangely at peace. For the first time in 5 years, my time was my own, and I intended to use it wisely. 3 weeks after my dismissal, I was sitting in a beachside cafe, sipping an overpriced latte and scrolling through job listings, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Joseph Bryant, Quantum Shift's CTO. Dana, he said, his voice overly friendly. How have you been? Fine, Joseph, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. What can I do for you? Well, the team has been working on the next release, and they had a few questions about some of your architecture decisions. I was hoping you might have time for a quick consultation. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Consultation was an interesting choice of words. I'm not sure that would be appropriate given the circumstances of my departure, I said carefully. Joseph cleared his throat. Look, Dana, we're willing to compensate you for your time. Logan may have been hasty in his decision. Hasty, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? There was a pause. The documentation is a bit specialized. I almost laughed. Specialized was a polite way of saying that my personal shorthand was incomprehensible to the new team. I had documented everything, yes, but in a way that made perfect sense to me, and apparently no one else. I'm afraid I'm quite busy at the moment, I said. Perhaps Troy, with his extensive experience, can figure it out. Dana, Joseph began, but I cut him off. I wish you all the best, Joseph. Truly. I ended the call. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from Joseph. We can double your consultation rate. Please reconsider. I set my phone down without replying. Let them stew for a bit. That evening, as I was making dinner, I received an email from Ethan Wilson, one of the junior engineers I had mentored. The subject line read, "You won't believe this." Ethan had always been loyal to me, grateful for the guidance I'd provided when no one else had time for him. The email was brief. Dana, everything's falling apart here. Troy can't make sense of your authentication system. 3 clients have reported major issues after the latest deployment. Logan's blaming the engineering team, but everyone knows it's because they can't understand your architecture. Joseph is in full panic mode. Just thought you should know. Miss having you here? I sat down at my kitchen counter, staring at the email. I hadn't expected things to unravel so quickly. Part of me felt a twinge of concern for my former colleagues. Most of them were good people caught in a bad situation. But another part of me, the part that remembered Logan's smirking dismissal, felt the first flicker of satisfaction. My phone rang again. This time it was Valerie. I just got a call from Quantum Shift's legal department, she said. They want to discuss a consulting arrangement. Already? I was surprised at how quickly things had escalated. Apparently they're having some technical difficulties, Valerie said, her tone deliberately understated. What do you recommend? I asked. I recommend we let them sweat a bit longer, she replied. The more desperate they get, the better position you'll be in. As I hung up, I felt a shift inside me, the realization that I now held the power in this situation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition of my value. And it seemed that recognition was finally coming. By the 4th week after my dismissal, the calls became more frequent. Joseph, Troy, even Ethan with unofficial pleas for help. I maintained my distance, giving vague responses when I bothered to answer at all. While they scrambled, I was busy. I'd set up meetings with 3 competing firms, not looking for employment, but exploring the market landscape. I needed to understand my position of strength. On a bright Tuesday morning, Exactly 1 month after I'd cleaned out my desk, Logan himself called. "Dana," he said, his voice straining to maintain its usual confidence. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. The board and I have been discussing your departure, and we feel there might have been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "About what exactly?" "About your value to the company," Logan said, the words clearly difficult for him to utter. "We'd like to bring you back on as a consultant to help with the transition." I almost asked, "What about nobody remembering my contributions?" but decided against it. No need to reveal my hand so early. "I'm not interested in consulting," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." "Dana, be reasonable. We're talking about a significant consulting fee. 6 figures for a few weeks of work." "I'm quite busy at the moment," I replied, echoing my response to Joseph. "Best of luck with everything." I hung up before he could respond and immediately called Valerie. "Logan just called offering a consulting position," I told her. 6 figures. "They're getting desperate," Valerie said. "But we need to tread carefully. Have you been monitoring their product?" I had indeed. Quantum Shift's client-facing dashboard had been experiencing significant downtime. Their Twitter support account was working overtime responding to complaints. Their stock price, which had surged after the funding announcement, had dropped 15% in the past week. "It's not looking good for them," I confirmed. "Perfect," Valerie said. "I've been doing some digging of my own. Did you know that Logan presented your authentication system as his own creation to the investors?" I felt a cold shock run through me. "What?" "I have a contact on their board. Apparently, Logan's been taking credit for your work for years. The investors were funding his vision, not realizing that the technical backbone was entirely your creation." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. It was one thing to dismiss me. It was another to steal credit for my work. This crossed a line I hadn't anticipated. "What's our next move?" I asked, my voice hardening. "We wait 1 more week," Valerie advised. "Let the situation deteriorate further. Then we send a formal notification of retained intellectual property rights." "Can we do that?" I signed their employment contract. "The contract covers work done within the scope of your employment, but your custom authentication system, the one that makes their product unique? You developed the initial prototype on your own time before you joined Quantum Shift. You have the dated GitHub repository to prove it. You brought it with you, refined it for their purposes, but the core IP could be argued to remain yours." I remembered those early days clearly, coding in my apartment on weekends, developing the authentication system as a personal project before Logan ever approached me about joining Quantum Shift. I had mentioned this to Logan when I was hired, but he had dismissed it as unimportant. Now it seemed that dismissal might cost him dearly. "So we have leverage," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "More than leverage," Valerie replied. "We have a legal claim that could freeze their entire operation if we push it." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. I had walked away from Quantum Shift feeling powerless. Now, the tables had turned so completely that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. 5 weeks after my departure, the situation at Quantum Shift reached a breaking point. Their stock had fallen another 20%, and rumors of client departures were circulating in industry forums. My phone had stopped ringing, a silence more ominous than the desperate calls had been. I was at home watching a documentary when my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was shocked to find Olivia Harris, the lead investor from Threshold Ventures, standing on my porch. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, her expression serious. "I apologize for the unexpected visit, but this couldn't wait. May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. Olivia had always been cordial during investor presentations, but we'd never spoken one-on-one. "I'll be direct," she said, settling onto my couch. "Quantum Shift is in trouble, and I believe you know why." "I've heard there are some technical challenges," I replied carefully. Olivia fixed me with a penetrating stare. "The authentication system is failing, and nobody can fix it. Logan assured us they had redundancies in place for key personnel departures, but that was clearly untrue. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. What's more concerning, she went on, is that we've discovered discrepancies in what we were told about the company's technical leadership. Logan presented himself as the architectural visionary, with you as merely an implementer of his ideas. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Is that what he told you? It is, but our technical advisors have reviewed the situation, and it's become apparent that you were the true architect of the system. Logan misrepresented your role to secure funding. I took a deep breath. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. As am I, Olivia said. Threshold invested $10 million based partly on false premises. That's why I'm here, Ms. Whitaker. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. Logan doesn't know I'm meeting with you, but I believe your presence at this meeting is essential. This was unexpected. I had anticipated legal negotiations, not a board invitation. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. I'm proposing that you tell the truth. Help us understand what we're dealing with and what options we have. In return, I promise that your contributions will be properly acknowledged and valued. I thought about this for a moment. I appreciate the offer, Ms. Harris, but my attorney has advised me not to engage directly with Quantum Shift without proper legal protections. Olivia nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I understand. What if we include your attorney in the meeting? This isn't about cutting deals in back rooms. It's about transparency. The investors need to know what's really happening. I considered her proposal. Attending the board meeting could be risky, but it also presented an opportunity to directly address the people with the power to make real changes. I'll need to consult with my attorney, I said finally. Of course, Olivia stood to leave. The meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I hope to see you there. After she left, I immediately called Valerie and explained the situation. This is an interesting development, Valerie said. Earlier than I expected, but potentially advantageous. If you attend, you'll be speaking from a position of strength, not desperation. What about our original plan, the formal notification? We can still proceed with that. In fact, I'd recommend sending it tonight before the meeting. That way they'll be aware of your legal position when you walk into the room. I agreed, and Valerie promised to send the notification immediately. That night I barely slept. Tomorrow would be a confrontation I hadn't sought but now welcomed. I wasn't going in seeking revenge, but I was determined to set the record straight. Logan had tried to erase me from the narrative of Quantum Shift's success. Tomorrow I would write myself back in, this time indelibly. The Quantum Shift offices looked exactly the same as when I'd left 6 weeks ago, yet everything felt different. I walked through the reception area with Valerie beside me, turning heads as I passed. The whispers followed us down the hallway to the main conference room. When we entered, the tension was palpable. Around the long table sat the board members, including Olivia Harris, 3 other investors, and the company's executive team. Logan sat at the head of the table, his usual confident smile nowhere to be seen. Joseph, the CTO, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Ms. Whitaker, thank you for joining us, Olivia said, rising to greet me. And this must be your attorney, Ms. Knowles. That's correct, Valerie replied smoothly, setting her briefcase on the table. We received your invitation and are here in good faith, but I should note that we delivered a formal notification of retained intellectual property rights to Quantum Shift's legal team last night. Logan's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You signed an employment contract that clearly states all work product belongs to the company. I'm aware of what I signed, I replied calmly. But the authentication system in question was initially developed before my employment began. I have documented proof, including the original GitHub repository with timestamps. One of the investors, a silver-haired man I recognized as Victor Lee from Magnitude Capital, leaned forward. Is this true, Logan? Did you know about this? Logan's expression tightened. Dana's making misleading claims. She may have had some preliminary code, but anything substantial was developed on company time. I retrieved my laptop from my bag and connected it to the conference room display. With your permission, I'd like to share some evidence. Olivia nodded, and I pulled up the GitHub repository, showing the commit history that clearly dated back to before my employment at Quantum Shift. Then I displayed emails between Logan and me from my early days at the company, where I explicitly mentioned bringing my authentication system to the project. You'll note, Valerie added, that Mr. Merritt acknowledged Dana's prior work in these communications, but never formalized any transfer of intellectual property rights beyond the standard employment agreement, which does not cover pre-existing work. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Logan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There's more, I continued, pulling up slides from investor presentations. These are materials presented to you during the Series A round. You'll notice that the authentication system is highlighted as a key competitive advantage, but my name is conspicuously absent from any of the credits. Victor Lee removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. Logan, you represented yourself as the technical visionary behind these systems. I supervised their development, Logan insisted. Supervision is not creation, I countered, and your supervision consisted mainly of setting unrealistic deadlines while taking credit for the results. Joseph, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. I can confirm that Dana was the principal architect of the authentication system. Without her, we can't maintain it properly, as the past 6 weeks have demonstrated. Logan glared at Joseph, but the damage was done. The investors were now looking at Logan with open suspicion. What exactly are you seeking here, Ms. Whitaker? Asked another board member. Valerie stepped in. My client is not looking to destroy Quantum Shift. She believes in the product she helped build. However, she requires proper recognition of her contributions, appropriate compensation for her intellectual property, and guarantees against future misrepresentation of her work. And if these terms aren't met, Logan challenged, then the notification stands, Valerie replied coolly. Quantum Shift will be legally prevented from using the authentication system, effectively rendering your product non-functional. The reality of the situation seemed to dawn on everyone simultaneously. Quantum Shift's $10 million valuation, their entire business model, hung in the balance. And I, the engineer they had so easily dismissed, now held the key to their survival. The emergency board meeting continued for another 3 hours. As discussions intensified, Logan's position weakened with each revelation. The board members, initially skeptical of my claims, grew increasingly convinced as more evidence emerged. Victor Lee called for a brief recess, during which the board members convened privately. When they returned, Olivia Harris addressed the room with a newfound authority. After careful consideration, the board has made several decisions, she announced. First, we're initiating an immediate leadership change. Logan, we appreciate your vision in founding Quantum Shift, but it's clear that there have been serious misrepresentations under your leadership. Logan's face went pale. You can't be serious. I built this company from nothing. With Dana's technology, Victor Lee added pointedly, a fact you deliberately concealed from us. Second, Olivia continued, we're offering Dana a new position as Chief Technology Officer, with appropriate equity compensation and full recognition for her past contributions. My heart raced. This was more than I had expected. Additionally, she said, we're proposing a licensing agreement for the authentication system with royalties on all future revenue derived from its use. Valerie and I exchanged glances. This addressed nearly everything we had hoped for. And finally, Olivia concluded, we're requiring a public correction regarding the development of Quantum Shift's core technology, acknowledging Dana's role as the principal architect. Logan stood up abruptly. This is a mistake. You're handing the company over to someone who's holding it hostage. No, Logan, I said quietly. I'm not holding the company hostage. I'm simply ensuring that the truth is recognized. Victor Lee nodded. The board's decision is final, Logan. You can accept a reduced role as a strategic advisor, or you can leave entirely. The choice is yours. Logan looked around the table, searching for allies but finding none. Without another word, he stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. In the silence that followed, I realized that the vindication I felt wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. 3 months later, I stood on a small stage at Quantum Shift's headquarters, addressing our team and a handful of tech journalists. The company had undergone a remarkable transformation. Today marks an important milestone, I began. With the release of our new platform update, we're not just improving functionality. We're rebuilding on a foundation of transparency and collaborative innovation. The authentication system that had once been my solitary creation was now maintained by a team of talented engineers, all of whom received proper credit for their contributions. The documentation was comprehensive and accessible, ensuring that the company would never again be dependent on a single person's knowledge. After the announcement, Olivia approached me, smiling warmly. The investors are impressed with the turnaround. User complaints are down 87% and we're seeing former clients return. It's a team effort, I replied, genuinely proud of what we had accomplished. True, but your leadership has been the catalyst. By the way, have you heard about Logan? I shook my head. Logan had chosen to leave the company entirely, rejecting the board's offer of an advisory role. He's trying to launch another startup, Olivia said, but he's finding it difficult to secure funding. Word travels fast in this industry. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. I hope he learns from this experience. As do I, Olivia agreed, though some lessons come at a higher cost than others. Later that day, I received an unexpected email from Logan. It was brief. Dana, I owe you an apology. I should have valued your contributions instead of trying to diminish them. The company is better off in your hands. Logan. I sat at my desk contemplating how to respond. In the end, I kept it simple. Logan, thank you for the apology. I wish you success in your future endeavors. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the most painful ones. Dana. It wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It was about acknowledging the truth, something I had fought for and finally achieved. How long have you been with us, Melody? 29 years, is it? David Langston leaned back in his leather chair, his voice eerily casual. That's quite the accomplishment. 29 years and 362 days, to be exact, I replied, my stomach nodding as I noticed the manila folder on his desk. In all my years at Grantwell Manufacturing, I'd never been called into a director's office on a Friday afternoon. Something was wrong. I'm Melody Reynolds, 61 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer at one of St. Paul's largest manufacturing companies. I've spent nearly 3 decades ensuring that Grantwell operated within legal parameters, documenting irregularities, and standing firm when others wanted easy solutions to complex problems. My pension was set to fully vest on Monday, just 3 days away. The milestone I'd worked my entire adult life for was within reach. David slid the folder across his polished desk. Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. His eyes never met mine. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Budget constraints? Grantwell had just announced record profits last quarter. This is your severance package, he continued, tapping the folder with his manicured finger. Sign by tomorrow or get nothing. HR will escort you to clean out your desk. I should have felt anger, shock, perhaps even the urge to plead. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't random. This was calculated, precisely timed to fall before my pension vested. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder. I didn't open it. David looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or protests. But I'd spent my career examining patterns, and this one was clear as day. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked out with my dignity intact. Janet from HR hovered awkwardly as I packed my personal items. The photo of my late husband Thomas, the potted plant my daughter had given me when she left for college 15 years ago, and the plaque I'd received for 25 years of service. I didn't take much. Most of what mattered couldn't fit in a cardboard box. "I'm so sorry, Melody," Janet whispered, glancing nervously toward the security guard waiting to escort me out. "This isn't right." "It is what it is," I replied, but inside I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it was potentially illegal. For the past 4 years, I'd been meticulously documenting financial irregularities that had accelerated since David joined the company. I'd sent detailed memos up the chain, flagged suspicious patterns, and even presented evidence of backdated reports. All of it had been dismissed, buried, or returned with instructions to focus on more pressing matters. As I walked through the lobby one last time, the security guard awkwardly held the door. "Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this charade. I nodded politely. "I believe I will." The drive home felt surreal. 29 years of dedication ended with a manila folder and a cardboard box. The April rain tapped against my windshield as I navigated the familiar streets of St. Paul, Minnesota, past the cathedral where Thomas and I had married, beyond the school where our daughter had graduated, toward the modest home I'd maintained on my own since becoming a widow 12 years ago. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for Grantwell, the missed recitals during those early years when I worked late to earn my promotions, the family vacations cut short when compliance emergencies arose, the countless evenings spent reviewing documentation that nobody else had the patience to examine. I'd given the company my prime years, believing in the security that my pension would eventually provide. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat quietly for a moment, allowing myself to feel the weight of what had happened. David Langston had been with the company just 6 months. He'd arrived with a reputation for streamlining operations, which typically meant cutting costs at any price. I'd known we would eventually clash when I refused to certify compliance on his latest cost-cutting initiative, a measure that skirted several regulatory requirements. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly and ruthlessly he would move to eliminate me. Inside, I made myself tea and sat at my kitchen table, finally opening the severance package. The terms were insulting: 3 months' salary in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company. No pension, no healthcare continuation, no acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of service. Just a check and a legal trap designed to silence me. The document required my signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on fear and desperation to make me sign quickly, without consulting anyone. This wasn't standard practice. It was a targeted effort to rob me of what I'd earned. I set the papers aside and walked to my home office, where I kept my personal records. Behind a row of family photo albums sat a fireproof lockbox, my insurance policy. For 4 years, I'd been bringing home copies of troubling financial documents, keeping detailed notes of conversations, and saving emails that outlined patterns of misconduct. Not because I planned to use them, but because my professional instincts told me something wasn't right. I opened the box and reviewed its contents: loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control certifications. It was all there. Over 1,000 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud that had accelerated under David's direction. I'd reported every issue through proper channels, only to be ignored or sidelined. I reached for my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in years. Gregory Santos had been Grantwell's chief financial officer before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always respected my diligence, even when others found it tedious. It's time, I thought, as my finger hovered over his name. The next morning, I woke with purpose. After speaking with Gregory for nearly 2 hours the previous evening, I had a clear path forward. I dressed carefully in the navy suit I reserved for important meetings, as if preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Gregory had listened intently as I outlined the situation and described the documentation I'd collected. His response was measured but resolute. This isn't just wrongful termination, Melody. Based on what you're describing, Grantwell could be facing serious securities violations. The timing with your pension, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He'd explained the whistleblower protections available through the SEC and arranged for me to meet with his team on Monday morning. Don't sign anything, he'd cautioned, and secure those documents somewhere safe. I spent Saturday morning making copies of everything, organizing the evidence chronologically, and preparing a detailed index. The work kept my mind focused, preventing the anger and hurt from overwhelming me. By noon, I had 3 identical packages ready, one for the SEC, one for my personal records, and one that would serve as leverage if needed. My phone rang several times throughout the day. Janet from HR, David Langston, even the company's general counsel. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly urgent messages. Melody, we need that paperwork signed today. David's voice was tense. I can come by and pick it up if that helps. The legal counsel was more direct. Ms. Reynolds, it's imperative we receive your signed agreement before close of business. Failure to comply could jeopardize your severance package entirely. Their desperation confirmed what I already suspected. They knew they were vulnerable and wanted my silence secured before the weekend ended. At 4:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see David standing on my porch, his expensive suit looking out of place in my modest neighborhood. I didn't answer. Melody, I know you're in there, he called through the door. This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers and we can all move on. I watched silently as he eventually placed an envelope in my mailbox and returned to his luxury sedan. Only then did I retrieve it, another copy of the same agreement, with a handwritten note. Final opportunity. Sign by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter called for our weekly chat. Elizabeth was concerned by the strange tone in my voice. Mom, what's going on? You sound different. I considered downplaying the situation but decided against it. Elizabeth deserved the truth. I was terminated yesterday, I said simply. What? But you're just days away from your full pension. They can't do that. They did, I replied. But don't worry, I'm handling it. Do you need me to come home? I can be on a flight from Denver tomorrow. No, sweetheart, stay put. I've got this covered. After we hung up, I sat in my living room as darkness fell, thinking about Monday's meeting with the SEC. For years, I'd tried to address these issues internally, believing in the system and the company's integrity. I'd been loyal, discreet, and professional, even when I suspected serious wrongdoing. But Grantwell had made its choice, and now I would make mine. I would not be signing their agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not let them discard 3 decades of my life without consequence. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully, placed my documentation in a secure briefcase, and drove downtown to the federal building where Gregory had arranged our meeting. The weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my shoulders, but there was also a sense of rightness to it all. The SEC offices were understated but imposing, all glass partitions and hushed conversations. Gregory met me in the lobby, his familiar face lined with more years but still carrying the sharp intelligence I remembered. Melody, he said warmly, shaking my hand. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. It's good to see you, Gregory, I replied. Thank you for taking this seriously. He led me to a conference room where 2 other investigators waited. Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant. Both greeted me with professional courtesy. Mrs. Reynolds, Angela began, before we start, I want to confirm that you understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back. I nodded. I understand completely. For the next 3 hours, I walked them through my documentation. The irregular financial reporting I'd first noticed 4 years ago, when shipments didn't match invoices. The quality control certifications that had been backdated after products had already been shipped. The pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified in recent quarters, particularly after David Langston's arrival. James examined the financial documents with growing concern. These discrepancies aren't small, he noted. The company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18% for the past 2 years. That's securities fraud. And you reported these issues internally? Angela asked. Multiple times, I confirmed, showing them copies of my memos and emails. Each time I was told the issues were being addressed or that I was misinterpreting the data. When David joined 6 months ago, my concerns started being rerouted to his office where they disappeared entirely. Gregory leaned forward. And you believe your termination was directly related to these reports? Without question. The timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it obvious. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major issues with David's latest cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone before I could escalate further. As our meeting concluded, Angela outlined the next steps. We'll need your formal statement, then we'll begin our investigation, which typically remains confidential until we determine whether enforcement action is warranted. How long will that take? I asked. It varies, she replied. But given the documentation you've provided and the clear pattern of misconduct, we may move quickly on this one. I hadn't even returned home when my phone rang. It was Janet from HR, her voice trembling. Melody, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. David's been locked in his office all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel. So it had begun, faster than I'd anticipated. The SEC must have made immediate contact with Grantwell's legal team. I'm not surprised, I said calmly. Did you? Janet hesitated. Melody, did you report something? I simply did what I should have done years ago, I replied. What's happening with my pension paperwork? That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've put everything on hold until further notice. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was William Hargrove, the chairman of the board, a man who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few previous interactions. Ms. Reynolds, he said, his typically confident voice sounding strained. We seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the office tomorrow morning to discuss matters? I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove, I replied. Any discussions should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, he cleared his throat. I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal, then. As I hung up, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness at the necessity of it all. I had never wanted to be a whistleblower. I had only wanted to do my job with integrity and retire with the security I'd earned. But Grantwell had forced my hand, and now we would all face the consequences. My phone continued to ring throughout the evening, colleagues seeking information, executives attempting damage control. I answered none of them. The time for private conversations had passed. Now everything would happen in the light. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. Local business publications ran headlines about an SEC investigation into Grantwell Manufacturing, sending the company's stock into a tailspin. Financial analysts who had praised David's efficiency measures just weeks ago now questioned the integrity of the company's entire reporting structure. I received a formal letter from Grantwell's legal department withdrawing my termination notice and placing me on administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review. It was a transparent attempt to mitigate damages coming far too late. At 10 a.m., my attorney Barbara Reynolds, no relation, but the coincidence amused us both, accompanied me to a meeting at Grantwell's headquarters. The same security guard who had escorted me out on Friday now nodded respectfully as we entered. The atmosphere in the building was tense, with employees huddled in whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when we passed. We were shown to the main boardroom, where William Hargrove waited with the company's outside counsel and 3 other board members. David Langston was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Reynolds," William began, seeming to have aged years in just a few days. "We've initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Barbara spoke before I could respond. "Let's be clear about something, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Reynolds didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She documented and reported them repeatedly over a period of 4 years, as her job required her to do. The company's decision to ignore those reports, and then to terminate her days before her pension vested, speaks volumes." William shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, that's part of what we're investigating. I want to personally assure Ms. Reynolds that her termination has been rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing with all benefits intact." "Including my pension?" I asked directly. "Of course," he replied quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting role after your retirement, which you can begin immediately if you wish. We value your expertise and—" "My client isn't making any decisions today," Barbara interrupted, "and any discussion about future arrangements should be preceded by a full accounting of how her previous concerns were suppressed." The meeting continued for another hour, with the board members attempting to distance themselves from both David's actions and the financial irregularities I'd documented. They painted themselves as victims of misinformation, expressing shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct. I remained mostly silent, letting Barbara handle the legal maneuvering while I observed their body language. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never noticed me. Not really. Now they couldn't look away, their expressions a mix of fear and newfound respect. As we prepared to leave, William made one final appeal. "Melody, we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." I looked at him directly for the first time. "Mr. Hargrove, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing the issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, and neither resulted in action. At what point in that history did I have your support?" The room fell silent. "I'll cooperate fully with both the internal investigation and the SEC," I continued. "But I'll be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage Grantwell will depend entirely on what you do next, not what you say in this room." As Barbara and I walked out, she whispered, "That was perfectly stated." It wasn't until we reached the parking lot that I allowed myself a deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to fade, leaving me drained but clear-headed. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was merely the beginning of accountability. "What happens now?" I asked Barbara as we stood beside our cars. "Now?" She smiled slightly. "Now they scramble to save what they can while the investigation continues. But make no mistake, Melody, they're terrified of you." I shook my head. "They're not terrified of me, they're terrified of the truth. There's a difference." Barbara nodded thoughtfully. "There is indeed. And that difference is why you'll win this, regardless of how it plays out." As I drove home, I wondered what Thomas would have thought of all this. My late husband had always encouraged my meticulous nature, even when others found it frustrating. "Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody," he'd say. "It's a superpower." Perhaps he'd been right all along. By Friday, exactly 1 week after my termination, the story had evolved into a full-blown corporate scandal. The SEC had issued formal requests for information from Grantwell, and an internal memo from William Hargrove announced David Langston's immediate suspension pending investigation. The company's stock had dropped nearly 30%, triggering concerns from major investors and partners. I was no longer just Melody Reynolds' overlooked compliance officer. Business journals now referred to me as a whistleblower and the woman who exposed Grantwell. The sudden attention was uncomfortable, but I remained focused on the process, working closely with the SEC investigators who now had offices set up in a separate building near Grantwell's headquarters. The evidence I'd provided had opened many doors, but the investigation was revealing even more troubling patterns. Gregory called to update me on their progress. "Melody, it's worse than we thought," he said, his voice grave. "The financial manipulation goes back at least 5 years, predating Langston. He accelerated it, but he didn't start it." "I suspected as much," I replied. "There were irregularities I couldn't fully document because I couldn't access certain executive-level reports." "Well, we can access them now," Gregory continued. "And they tell a story of systematic fraud designed to inflate the company's value. The board is claiming ignorance, but at least 3 members had to have known. They signed off on key transactions." This news should have vindicated me, but instead, it left me feeling hollow. The company I dedicated my life to had been corrupted at levels even I hadn't fully comprehended. The people I'd trusted with my concerns had been actively participating in the very fraud I was reporting. That afternoon, I received a call from Elizabeth. Her voice was tight with anger. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're trying to discredit you." I hadn't. I'd been avoiding media coverage, focusing instead on the official proceedings. "What are they saying?" I asked calmly. "That Grantwell executive, Langston, gave an interview claiming you had performance issues and were bitter about being passed over for promotion. He's making it sound like you're retaliating because of personal grievances." I wasn't surprised. It was a predictable defense strategy: attack the whistleblower's credibility rather than address the allegations. "It doesn't matter, Elizabeth," I assured her. "The evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history now." But David was trying to do exactly that. By that evening, several news outlets had picked up his narrative, questioning my motives and suggesting I had manipulated documentation to frame him. It was a desperate move from a desperate man, but it still stung to see my integrity questioned so publicly. Barbara called immediately. "Don't respond to any of it," she advised. "The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this." I wasn't planning to respond, I told her, but I am going to do something else. The next morning, I drove to my local bank and asked to speak with the manager, Tracy Ferguson. I'd known her for years as she handled most of Grantwell's local banking transactions. "Melody," she greeted me warmly. "I've been following the news. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Tracy, but I need access to my safe deposit box." Inside the private room, I opened the box and removed a sealed envelope I'd placed there 3 years ago. It contained copies of email exchanges between David's predecessor and 2 board members, discussing ways to manage financial appearances during a critical acquisition period. I had found these accidentally while archiving old emails, and something had told me to secure them separately from my other documentation. I hadn't included these in my initial SEC report because they weren't directly related to the current issues. But now, with David attempting to undermine my credibility, they provided crucial context showing that the problematic practices predated my concerns about him specifically. I called Gregory immediately. "I have something you need to see," I told him. "It changes the narrative completely." As I drove to meet him, I felt no satisfaction, only certainty that the full truth would now emerge, regardless of who it implicated. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, 10 days after my termination and 7 days after the SEC investigation became public. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. The additional documentation I'd provided had accelerated the investigation dramatically, implicating not just David, but multiple board members in a years-long pattern of financial manipulation. Gregory called me from outside the meeting room. "It's chaos in there," he reported. "The SEC enforcement team just presented their preliminary findings. 3 board members have resigned on the spot. David is trying to claim he was following established practices, but no one's buying it anymore. By noon, Grantwell issued a press release announcing a leadership restructuring and full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The carefully worded statement confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and the termination of David Langston for cause. The company's stock, already battered, dropped another 12%. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Janet from HR again. "Melody, the interim CEO wants to meet with you. Tomorrow, if possible." The interim CEO was Patricia Donovan, the former chief operating officer who had always treated me with professional respect, if not warmth. I agreed to the meeting but insisted it take place at my attorney's office. When Patricia arrived the next day, she looked exhausted but determined. "Melody, I won't waste time with pleasantries," she began. "The company is in crisis, and you're at the center of it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She slid a folder across the table, eerily similar to the termination paperwork David had presented just 11 days earlier. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full pension vesting," she explained. "It also includes an additional compensation package recognizing the difficulties you've experienced." I opened the folder. The compensation package included a sum equal to 5 years of my salary, full healthcare coverage for life, and a formal apology from the board. "We're also establishing a new corporate ethics division," Patricia continued. "We'd like you to help design it, as a consultant, after your retirement. Your experience is invaluable." I closed the folder without commenting on the offer. "And David Langston? The board members involved?" Patricia's expression hardened. "Criminal charges are expected. The company will not be defending them." Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived at Grantwell Manufacturing. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching as David Langston and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked diminished in his dark suit, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave, and I saw recognition there, not of me specifically, but of what I represented, the consequences of his actions personified. The Grantwell scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures and the crucial role of internal compliance. I had declined the consulting position with the reorganized company, choosing instead to work with regulatory agencies to develop better whistleblower protocols. My story had inspired other compliance officers to come forward with their own documentation of corporate wrongdoing, creating a ripple effect across industries. The SEC had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties assessed against Grantwell. Combined with my pension and the settlement, I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, naming it after Thomas. Elizabeth had relocated to St. Paul to be closer to me, bringing my 2 grandchildren with her. We spent weekends together at my new lakeside home, building memories I'd missed while working all those long hours. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset over the water, Elizabeth asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, do you regret staying at Grantwell all those years, given how it ended?" I considered this carefully. "No," I finally answered. "I regret that it was necessary to expose them, but I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles even when, especially when, it costs you something." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "You taught me that, you know. Not with words, but by example." That, I realized, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the vindication, not the financial security, but the knowledge that my choices had shown my daughter what it meant to stand firm in your values, regardless of the consequences. As for Grantwell Manufacturing, the company had survived, though greatly diminished. The new leadership had implemented stringent compliance protocols and transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their annual reports, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as an apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved practices with professional satisfaction. Some might see my story as one of revenge, but I've never viewed it that way. I simply did what I had always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood by my findings. The difference is that this time, finally, others were forced to listen.